In what follows, I will look at some videos and will try to understand why exactly it could be that this Bolivian music video you're looking at contains a peculiar mixture of patriotic landscapes, traditional dances, and beauty queens in underwear. For that, we'll have to take a closer look into the interconnections between nationalism, eroticism, race, and sexuality. Nations are by definition exclusionary. They are constituted by their negative spaces, by that which lies beyond their borders. They explicitly assert a difference between us and them, us being what they are not, and vice versa. In that, nationalism is a discourse of belonging. It invokes a sense of being a part of a community. A community grounded in the invisible ties between individuals. The sharing of an essence, which is presumed to contain the characteristics of each particular nation. Nationalism is hereby always linked to an internationalism, understood not as a dissolving of borders toward the larger goal of a unified humanity, but as a, more often than not, competitive system of comparison. Nationalism is thus not only about the defining of an international identity, but also about its recognition with the international family of nations. Beauty contests like Miss World or Miss Universe are a modern way to express these competitions between nations, namely through women's bodies. In that, they build on a long history of symbolically linking women with the nation. Women are nurturers, the mothers of the people, and, most importantly, guardians of the boundaries of the nation, by limiting marriage and sexual intercourse to our men. It is this reproduction in both its biological and social senses which positions female bodies at the nation's threshold. So we can say that the contestants of these pageants are representatives not only of, but for their respective nations. They are the nation. This is emphasized by referring them not with their personal name, but with their nation's name.
23, Bolivia!
Bolivia.
Bolivia is currently studying veterinary medicine. After graduating, this 23-year-old animal lover plans to work on farms with larger animals. Let's hear it for Bolivia!
Brazil.
Here, the supposedly internal essence and characteristic of the nation are linked to external visible markers. The female body thus becomes a mean through which nations can compete and measure themselves by international scales. Scales which are based on the level of the globalized ideas, progress and modernity. These bodies hold meaning beyond the individual. They are symbolic of the progress and modernity of a nation. For reputed third world nations, pageants consequently become a way to shake off their alleged backwardness and display their progress, the health of the nation. They become one possibility by which nations can claim a seat at the gleaming table of progress and modernity, or even invert global power relations. It is here that Colombia, Venezuela, Bolivia can be the best of the world, or the universe for that matter. This may be one reason why beauty contests are so important in Latin America. While in Europe they are rather a curiosity, it is not uncommon that Latin American people can rattle a list of their last few misses and take great pride in their women winning international contests like Miss Universe. Now, the public and highly globalized space of the beauty pageant becomes a site for the staging not only of modernity and progress, but also distinctiveness and tradition. That is, the particular national characteristics we've mentioned before. What we see here is a section of the Miss Universe contests called national costumes. Here, the contestants are required to present the typical dresses of their respective nations. While the displaying of an original national tradition clearly has a subordinated position in the order of priorities, we feel a certain tension arising out of the desire to present tradition without looking anachronistic or backwards, and embrace modernity without loosening a particular national identity. But what do we actually see looking at these bodies? We see women with light, fair skin, blonde hair and slender shape, dressed up in some sort of glamorized, exoticized and eroticized national costumes. It is rather obvious which element should present the traditional part of the nation and which one its modernity. It nearly feels as if the universality of modern beauty can embrace the particularity of each nation's tradition and take it with it on the luminous road of progress. Here the paradox is solved. Here it seems possible to be globally modern and nationally traditional at the same time. So what kind of modern beauty is presented to us? Apparently, to be modern and progressive, one has to be tall, slim and have fair hair. That is, blonde, long hair. In other words, one has to allude to an ideal, which is based on an idealized whiteness. These whitened female bodies then become a hinge between the nation and modernity. To put it simple, if the female body represents the nation and whiteness represents progress and modernity, then a nation can claim modernity and progress by selecting a whitened woman as its representative at an international beauty contest. Of course, whiteness is always a polysemous and context-specific term. As an identity, this whiteness is marked by a paradox. It is a negational identity, a subjectivity defined by what it is not. In this regard, racial identities are no different from national identities, or of course sexual identities. The constitution of a self is in constant and dependent relation with the constitution of an excluded other. In that, constitutions of identities have to be seen as an effect of power. They always take place within the power relations they tend to reproduce. What links these Latin American beauty queens is not their Latina appearance, but the negation and exclusion of the Indian and also African in it. This is what they represent in their respective countries. So what does all this mean for the national identity of a so-called underdeveloped country in Latin America? Let's take Bolivia as an example. Bolivia is a country where around 60% of the population is considered to be indigenous, 30% mestizo and 10% white or European. While regarding this majority, the contemporary indigenous cultures have been strikingly absent from the national imaginary. Bolivia, as many other countries in Latin America, has experienced a, let's call it, ethnic revitalization since the 1990s. This process became increasingly relevant since the election of Bolivia's first consciously indigenous president, Evo Morales, in 2005. Since then, it appears that some aspects of indigenous culture have become vital parts of the national imaginary of Bolivia and part of the national identity of its people. What we see here are the so-called Caporales. It is a traditional Andean dance that has its origins in the city La Paz. For urban mestizos, the Caporales represents the perfect blend of tradition and modernity, and there is no doubt that they are a representative part of their national identity. This may be part of the reason why Caporales fans, at least in the YouTube comment sections, have to insist over and over again that this dance and music is 100% Bolivian and not, as some people seem to be claiming, Peruvian or worse, Chilean. I want to point out two aspects that in my view are represented here. First, the eroticization of tradition as a means to modernize it. This point may be rather self-evident. For the second aspect, we need to take a closer look at those acted out storylines in some of the videos we will see later on. They are fairly common in music videos, most often of course, telling stories about love and betrayal. What struck me here was not only that the female protagonists of these stories are most often whitened, slender women with blondish hair, but also that the depiction of their activities and the environment they move in stands in strong contrast to the folkloric world of the dancers themselves. But now, let us first look at the other, that is used to constitute the mestizo's self-identity. This is so-called huayno music. It is a popular genre most often associated with the Andean indigenous people. What is most notable on the first glance is the difference in the representation of female bodies. In striking contrast to the tall, fair-skinned bodies of beauty queens, the bodies of indigenous women are presented as small and out of shape. But of course, it is not their physical appearance in itself. The more relevant difference seems to be that the bodies of these women are not presented through the modality of eroticism and desire that we have encountered in the Caporales videos or the beauty pageants. Their bodies arguably emphasize neither an aesthetics of physical beauty nor an eroticism of sexual attraction. The femininity expressed here seems to be, well, much more that of the matron than the maiden. Here we have to keep another point in mind. In contemporary rural highland Bolivia, indigenous women wear a lot of clothes. The wealthier a woman and the higher her social status, the greater her amount of clothing. And some wear as many as 5 heavy skirts. Here, the showing of flesh is neither common nor eroticized. Breasts are exposed quite regularly as women breastfeed their children. Why should they not? But it would be strange to consider this somehow as erotic or even sexual in a way. To illustrate this point, let us just take a quick look at this video by child singer Wendy Zulka titled La Tetita, which means teat or nipple. It is hard to imagine a young, prepubescent girl in Europe singing a song about how wonderful it is to suck the teat. It only seems possible in the indigenous Andes, precisely because the breast is so uneroticized. That this video became somewhat of a viral phenomenon and has over 16 million views indicates that Latin American urban middle classes find this also rather peculiar. Now let us look at this parody of the song found on YouTube, where the original video material is replaced by some scenes of an US-American movie. Well, I admit, this is an exaggerated example, but it just points us towards a notion present all over Bolivia, and not only there. Erotic female bodies are white female bodies. The irrelevance of the indigenous woman's body becomes nowhere as clear as in the case of beauty contests for indigenous people. Many of them are held in La Paz and its satellite El Alto, considered by many as the indigenous capital of the country, with nearly 90% of its population classified as indigenous. Here we see the Miss Cholita contestants. Now, the thing about this contest is that the judges do not grade physique or body measurements. They grade the wardrobe. Dress, hat, adornment, shoes, everything but the body. Now, let's switch to the Miss El Alto contest, where supposedly the most beautiful woman in the city is chosen.
alone, alone,
No, there is little doubt that the body which is represented as typical Indian is not the body which represents the nation. Indeed, it is not representative for modernity. When we look again at the Caporales, it is apparent which of the characteristics of indigenous people are selected to be used to nourish the identity of the nation. It seems as if it were exactly these characteristics of the traditional dresses that evoke a certain folkloric and ethnic feeling most specifically. Together with some typical dance moves like the twirling of the skirts, they establish a link between Bolivia's indigenous roots and its modern-day urban culture. Of course, there are some striking differences. Shorter skirts, high heels, low-cut tops. What better way to express their rejection of Indian atavism and the aspiration to modernity and progress than emphasizing the eroticism of the female body. Now I think we can take a second look at the music video from the beginning. We see the beautiful landscapes of the Andes, white snow on gentle slopes, and who stands there like being one with nature, one with the land? White women. Well, it even seems as if their whiteness is additionally emphasized through the use of a blue filter. And now, out of nowhere, the colorful glee of the traditional Caporales dress, standing out against the bright white snow. This video seems to be eager to establish an analogy between the beauty queens and the Caporales dancers, slim, tall dancers. They are even portrayed as the same women. It just screams, look, our traditional folklore is globally modern as pageants. And it is as modern because it is erotic. And I don't even want to mention why the alter ego of these musicians look like some sort of exaggerated version of a conquistador. And why it is the muscular, hairy body of these white gods in armor that the multitude of white women applaud to, pulling out their state-of-the-art phones to take some pictures with. But that's another story.
Todo el amor que yo te tuve ayer, has matado para siempre, ingrata y mala mujer. Falsas promesas con desilusión mataron para siempre mi pobre corazón. ¡A bailar, morenada! Para ti, mentirosa.
The great appeal of the Caporales then seems to consist in its ability to present tradition free of its anachronistic or backward character and embrace modernity without loosening a particular national ethnic identity.
Falsas promesas y hechizos de amor. Ay,
Here notions of buen vivir and alternative modernities become subsumed under the globalized notions of progress and modernity. Through them, the mestizo middle class can exclude unfavorable elements of indigenous culture from their national imaginary. Those few elements which are appropriated and reproduced to build a national identity on only do so through a white modality of eroticism and desire. As mentioned before, racial identities are not fixed, but they are not only relational, but also performative. In the Andeans, this is particularly relevant. Here, mestizos and Indians can whiten through their gendered and sexualized performances. That is, just by transforming their alleged, shy, reserved, non-sexual deportment and becoming sexually inviting. They can thus, as appears to be in these videos, mark their sexuality as the essence of what kinds of human beings they are, as indexical category to which they truly belong. Taking this further, this kind of sexuality can tell not only the truth about individual persons, but about racial and national entities. Race is a fiction, but a fiction that can become a social fact with great salience nonetheless. But we have to look beyond the obvious oppressive impact of racial naturalizations. While the system of racism acts to oppress certain categories of people, it also seeks to build a certain order of values and shape subjects within that order. When in this order, whiteness is presented as an object of desire through its allusion to an erotics of modernity, it becomes what women as well as men should desire in the opposite sex, as well as for their own bodies. In this process, race operates not merely as a negative principle, but also as an expression of confidence that seals every successful consolidation of power and superiority with the name white. Bolivian mestizos seem to use then their assertions of whiteness to claim membership in a global order of superiority.